The blood on my porch wasn't mine, but it might as well have been for how it stopped my heart cold. A tiny hand, no bigger than a sparrow's wing, pressed against the frost-covered wood, leaving crimson fingerprints that told a story I didn't want to read. The smallest girl, couldn't have been more than 5, lay crumpled against my door like a broken doll, her lips blue as winter sky, breath coming in shallow puffs that barely disturbed the falling snow. "Please don't let us die," she whispered, words so faint I almost missed them over the howling wind. Behind her, 4 other shapes huddled together under my porch overhang, their hollow eyes reflecting the lamplight like startled deer. 5 girls, ranging from maybe 5 to 15, all dressed in rags that wouldn't keep a dog warm, their faces gaunt with hunger and hollow with something worse than cold. The oldest one held a baby close to her chest. No, not a baby. Just the youngest girl who looked small enough to be one. My hand froze on the door handle. Every instinct screamed at me to slam it shut, to pretend I'd never seen them, to let the storm handle what I couldn't bear to face. Because I knew what happened to men who took in strays. I knew what happened to fools who tried to play savior in this God-forsaken territory. But that tiny voice cut through my defenses like a Bowie knife through silk. "Please, mister, we ain't eaten in 6 days." The wind picked up, driving snow horizontal across my porch, and I could see the girls shivering violently now, their teeth chattering like Morse code, spelling out their desperation. The middle girl, maybe 10 years old, had her arm wrapped around 2 others, trying to shield them with her own thin body. They'd been walking in this storm, probably for hours, following the faint glow of my cabin light through the darkness. My throat burned with words I couldn't say, promises I couldn't make. Because 15 years ago, I'd made a different promise. A promise written in blood and carved into my soul with guilt, sharp enough to cut bone. I'd sworn on my dead wife's grave that I'd never again try to save anyone, that I'd never again let someone depend on me for their life. But here they were. 5 reasons why that promise was about to shatter like ice under a hammer. The littlest one's eyes fluttered closed, and her hand slipped away from my door, leaving a smear of blood on the wood. She was dying right there on my porch, and her 4 sisters would follow before dawn if I didn't act. "Damn it all to hell," I muttered, throwing the door wide open. But this story begins 3 hours earlier, when the first scream cut through the night like a blade through darkness, and I made the mistake of looking out my window toward the road. The storm had been building since sunset, one of those late November blizzards that could bury a man alive if he wasn't careful. I'd banked my fire, checked my horses, and settled in with a bottle of whiskey and yesterday's newspaper when I heard it. A sound that raised every hair on the back of my neck. A child's scream, high and desperate, carried on the wind from somewhere out on the main road. Then another voice, older but just as terrified. Then silence. I told myself it was just the wind playing tricks. Just my guilty conscience conjuring ghosts from the storm. But then I heard it again, closer this time, and I knew with sick certainty that someone was out there, in the killing cold. I should have stayed inside. Should have poured another whiskey and pretended the wind was just wind and the screams were just my imagination playing cruel tricks. But I'd already made too many mistakes in my life to add letting children freeze to death to the list. The Colt felt heavy in my hand as I stepped into the storm, snow immediately stinging my face like thrown sand. The wind tried to push me back toward the cabin, as if the night itself was warning me away from whatever waited in the darkness. My boots crunched through snow that was already ankle-deep and getting deeper by the minute. "Hello out there," I called, my voice swallowed by the howling wind. "Anyone need help?" The silence that followed lasted long enough for doubt to creep in. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe 15 years of isolation had finally driven me over the edge, and I was chasing phantoms through a blizzard like some kind of madman. Then I saw them. 5 small shapes huddled together beside an overturned wagon about 100 yards down the road. The wagon's wheel was busted clean through, and whatever horse had been pulling it was long gone. No adults in sight, just children clinging to each other in the middle of nowhere with death closing in fast. "We're over here," the oldest girl called out, her voice strong despite the chattering of her teeth. "Please, we need help." As I got closer, the full scope of their desperation became clear. They wore nothing but thin cotton dresses and worn-out shoes, the kind of clothes that might keep you comfortable in spring, but would kill you in a winter storm. Their faces were hollow with hunger, cheeks sunken in ways that told me they'd been going without food for days, maybe longer. The oldest girl, maybe 15 with prematurely serious eyes, held the youngest one against her chest, trying to share what little warmth she had. The other 3 huddled close, their arms wrapped around each other, and I could see they were all shivering so hard they could barely speak. "Where are your folks?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer from the look in their eyes. "Dead," the oldest said simply. "Consumption took Ma 3 weeks back. Pa died in a mine accident before that. We've been trying to get to our aunt in Silver Creek, but the wagon wheel broke and our horse ran off when the storm started. Silver Creek was 40 miles away. In this weather, they'd never make it another mile, let alone 40. How long since you ate?" "6 days, she said, and my heart clenched like a fist. "We had some bread and jerky, but it ran out. Been drinking snow water and eating tree bark when we could find it." I knelt down beside the youngest girl, who couldn't have weighed more than a sack of flour. Her eyes were glassy with fever, and when I pressed my hand to her forehead, she was burning up despite the cold. Pneumonia, maybe, or just the body's way of shutting down when it had nothing left to burn. "What's your name, little one?" "Sarah," she whispered, the word barely audible over the wind. "Are you going to help us, mister? The others say maybe you won't, on account of you living alone and all." My chest tightened. They'd heard about me then. Heard that Jacob Stone was a hermit who wanted nothing to do with the world or the people in it. Heard that I'd been living alone on this ranch for 15 years, avoiding human contact like it was a disease. They probably didn't know why. The oldest girl was studying my face, trying to read whether we were salvation or just another dead end. "I'm Emma," she said. "These are my sisters, Mary, Lucy, and Catherine, and little Sarah here. We won't be any trouble, mister. Just need somewhere warm to wait out the storm, maybe some food if you can spare it. We'll work to pay you back, soon as we're able." Work. As if 5 starving, half-frozen children could do anything but die if I didn't act fast. I looked at their faces, saw the hope and desperation warring in their eyes, and felt the old familiar weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders like a yoke. The same weight that had crushed me once before. When I'd failed someone who depended on me and watched her die because I wasn't good enough, smart enough, strong enough to save her. "Please," Sarah whispered again, her small hand reaching out to touch my coat. "Please don't let us die." And just like that, 15 years of careful isolation crumbled like sand. "Come on," I said, scooping Sarah up in my arms. "Let's get you all inside before this storm gets worse." But even as I led them toward my cabin, I knew I was making a mistake that would cost us all dearly. Because in this territory, taking in orphans meant dealing with the law. and the law in these parts had teeth. The girls devoured the stew like wolves, barely pausing to breathe between spoonfuls. I'd thrown together whatever I had, salt pork, potatoes, carrots from my root cellar, and watched them eat with the kind of desperate hunger that made my chest ache. Little Sarah couldn't manage more than a few bites before exhaustion claimed her. But even those few spoonfuls brought some color back to her pale cheeks. "Slow down," I warned as Lucy, maybe 8 years old, started choking on a piece of potato. Food ain't going anywhere. But I understood their panic. When you haven't eaten in 6 days, every bite feels like it might be your last. Emma helped her younger sisters settle by the fire, wrapping them in every blanket I owned. She was trying to be strong, trying to be the mother these girls needed. But I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. 15 years old and carrying the weight of 4 other lives on her shoulders. "Thank you," she said quietly as I handed her a cup of coffee. "I know this ain't easy for you." She was right. Having people in my cabin felt wrong, like wearing boots on the wrong feet. For 15 years, this place had been my sanctuary. The one spot on earth where I didn't have to think about my failures or the people I'd let down. Now it was full of voices and movement and need, and every instinct told me to run. But then Sarah coughed in her sleep, a wet sound that rattled in her chest, and I knew running wasn't an option anymore. "We'll leave soon as the storm passes," Emma continued. "Don't want to cause you trouble with the town folks." My blood went cold. "What do you know about trouble with the town folks?" She glanced at her sisters, making sure they weren't listening, then leaned closer. "People talk. They say you keep to yourself on account of what happened to your wife. They say you don't trust nobody, and nobody trusts you." The coffee turned bitter in my mouth. People say a lot of things. They also say Sheriff Morrison's been looking for orphans, says it ain't right for children to run wild without proper supervision. Been rounding them up, sending them to that place in Carson City. The Morrison Home for Wayward Children. I'd heard stories about that place. Stories that made decent men lose sleep and hardened women weep. Children worked like slaves, beaten for the smallest infractions, fed barely enough to keep them breathing. The kind of place where hope went to die. "You can't go there," I said, the words coming out harder than I intended. "You understand me? Whatever happens, you can't let them take you to that place." Emma's eyes widened at the vehemence in my voice. "We won't. That's why we've been avoiding towns, staying on back roads. But the storm..." Thunder crashed overhead, so loud it shook the cabin windows. The wind howled like a living thing trying to claw its way inside, and I could see snow piling up against the glass. This wasn't just a storm. This was the kind of blizzard that could last for days. A knock at my door froze the blood in my veins. 3 sharp raps, deliberate and official. Emma went white as snow, gathering her sisters closer to the fire. Sarah whimpered in her sleep, and Catherine started crying softly. "Mr. Stone," a voice called through the wind. "Sheriff Morrison. Open up. We need to talk." I felt the girl's eyes on me, wide with terror. Emma was shaking her head frantically, mouthing the word "no" over and over. But Morrison wasn't the kind of man who took no for an answer, especially when it came to what he called civic duty. "I know they're in there, Stone," Morrison continued. "Saw the smoke from your chimney, the extra tracks in the snow. 5 sets of small footprints leading right to your door." My hand drifted to the Colt at my hip. Morrison was a decent shot, but he was also alone in a blizzard, and I had the advantage of shelter and high ground. But if I drew on a sheriff, there'd be no going back. I'd be an outlaw, and the girls would still end up at the Morrison home. Another knock, more insistent this time. Don't make this harder than it has to be," Morrison called. "Those children belong in proper care, not holed up with some hermit who can't even take care of himself." Emma was pulling her sisters toward the back of the cabin now, looking for somewhere to hide, but there was nowhere to go. Just one room, one door, and a sheriff who knew exactly what he was looking for. "2 minutes, Stone," Morrison said. "Then I'm coming in whether you open that door or not." Sarah stirred in her makeshift bed by the fire, her fever-bright eyes finding mine across the room. "Don't let him take us," she whispered. So quietly, I almost missed it over the storm. "Please, don't let him take us." I looked at those 5 frightened faces, thought about the choice I'd made 15 years ago when I'd chosen safety over courage, solitude over responsibility. Thought about my wife's last words and the promise I'd made to her grave, and the man I'd become in the long years since. Then I walked to the door and placed my hand on the latch. But before I could decide whether to open it or bar it forever, the sound of splintering wood told me Morrison had made the choice for me. The door exploded inward in a shower of splinters and snow, and Sheriff Morrison stepped through like the angel of death himself. He wasn't alone. Deputy Collins flanked him, both men with their hands resting on their gun butts, ice crystals frozen in their beards from the ride through the storm. "Evening, Stone," Morrison said, brushing snow off his coat like he was paying a social call instead of breaking down my door. "Hope you don't mind the entrance. Storm's getting worse, and I figured you might not hear me knocking." The girls huddled together by the fire, Emma trying to shield her sisters with her own body. Sarah was awake now, her fever-bright eyes darting between the lawmen and me, reading the danger in the room like a wild animal sensing predators. "Sheriff," I said, keeping my voice level, "what brings you out in weather like this?" "Oh, I think you know." Morrison's eyes swept the cabin, taking inventory of the extra bowls, the children's clothes hanging by the fire to dry, the unmistakable signs of more people than just me. "Got a report from the Hendersons about some children wandering the roads. Figured they might end up here, seeing as how this is the only shelter for miles." Deputy Collins had moved to block the door, cutting off any chance of escape. Not that there was anywhere to run in a blizzard that was already piling snow halfway up my windows. "These children are wards of the territory now," Morrison continued, his voice taking on that official tone lawmen used when they wanted to sound reasonable while doing unreasonable things. "Their parents are deceased, no other family to speak of. They need proper care, proper supervision, the kind only a legitimate institution can provide. They need food and warmth," I said, "which they're getting." Morrison laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "From you, a man who's been hiding from civilization for 15 years? A man who couldn't even protect his own wife?" The words hit like a physical blow, bringing back memories I'd spent years trying to bury. My wife's face pale with consumption, her hand in mine as the life faded from her eyes. The doctor telling me there was nothing more to be done, that sometimes people just died and there was no one to blame. But I'd blamed myself anyway. "That's enough," Emma said, stepping forward with more courage than any 15-year-old should have to summon. "Mr. Stone saved our lives. We would have died in that storm." Morrison's attention shifted to her, and I didn't like the calculating look in his eyes. "Emma Carson, isn't it? You're the oldest. Old enough to understand what's best for your sisters." "I understand plenty," she shot back. "I understand you want to ship us off to that hellhole in Carson City where children disappear and nobody asks questions. The Morrison Home for Wayward Children is a fine institution." "Named after your brother," Emma interrupted. "The brother who gets paid by the territory for every child he takes in, and doesn't much care what happens to them after. Morrison's face darkened. Careful, girl. Accusations like that can get a person in trouble. What kind of trouble? I asked, stepping between Morrison and the girls. The kind where children have accidents? The kind where they get lost in the system and nobody ever sees them again? Colin's hand tightened on his gun, but Morrison waved him off. You're walking a dangerous line, Stone. Harboring these children without proper authority is a crime. Interfering with lawful custody is a crime. And given your history, I don't think you want to add to your troubles. My history. He meant my wife, of course. The whispers that had followed me for 15 years. Some folks said I'd killed her myself, couldn't stand being married to a sick woman. Others said I'd been too cowardly to get her proper help, too selfish to take her to a city with better doctors. The truth was simpler and somehow worse. I'd tried everything and it hadn't been enough. But looking at these 5 girls, seeing the fear in their eyes, and remembering Sarah's whispered plea not to let them die, I realized something had changed. The man who'd failed his wife was gone, buried under 15 years of guilt and isolation. The man standing here now had a chance to succeed where he'd failed before. What do you want, Morrison? I asked. His smile was sharp as a blade. Smart question. See, the territory's been interested in this land of yours for a while now. Prime grazing, good water rights, close enough to the railroad to be valuable. There's been talk of expanding the town this direction. My blood turned to ice water. This is about my ranch. Everything's about something, Stone. You sign over the deed to this property, and maybe I forget I saw these children tonight. Maybe they just disappear into the storm, and nobody has to know what happened to them. Emma gasped, understanding hitting her like a physical blow. Collins shifted nervously, clearly uncomfortable with how far his boss was pushing this. And if I don't? I asked. Morrison's hand moved to his gun. Then I arrest you for kidnapping, and the children go to Carson City anyway. Only difference is, you'll be in prison when they disappear, so you won't be able to help them. The cabin fell silent except for the howling wind and the crackling fire. Sarah coughed again, that wet rattle that said time was running out for her no matter what choice I made. Emma was staring at me with desperate eyes, waiting for a miracle I wasn't sure I could deliver. But then I remembered something my wife had told me in her final days, when the fever was burning her up from the inside, and she could barely whisper. She'd gripped my hand with surprising strength and said, "The measure of a man isn't whether he fails. It's whether he gets back up and tries again." I'd been on my knees for 15 years. Maybe it was time to stand. "Sheriff," I said quietly, "I'm afraid I'm going to have to decline your generous offer." Morrison's eyes narrowed. "Last chance, Stone." But before I could answer, Emma stepped forward with something clutched in her hand. A folded piece of paper that looked official and important. "Maybe you should see this first," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Emma unfolded the paper with trembling hands, and even in the flickering firelight, I could see the official seal of the territorial government. Morrison's confident expression faltered as she held it out for him to read. "Last will and testament of James Carson," she said, her young voice carrying more authority than it had any right to. "Our father left us more than just his name, Sheriff." Morrison snatched the document, his eyes scanning the legal text. Collins moved closer to read over his shoulder, and I watched both men's faces change as they realized what they were looking at. "Impossible," Morrison muttered. "Carson was a miner. Miners don't own property." "Our father owned 3 claims on Silver Mountain," Emma continued, chin raised despite the danger. claims that survey says contain the largest silver deposit in the territory. We ain't just orphans, Sheriff. We're heiresses. The silence that followed was broken only by the wind trying to tear the roof off my cabin. Morrison's face had gone white, then red, then something approaching purple as the implications sank in. If these girls owned valuable mining claims, taking them to the Morrison home wasn't just kidnapping. It was theft on a scale that would bring federal marshals down from Denver. "How do I know this isn't forged?" he demanded. Emma reached into her dress and pulled out a small leather pouch. She loosened the drawstring and poured a handful of raw silver ore into her palm, the metal gleaming like captured starlight in the firelight. "Pa gave us each some before he died," she said. "Told us to keep it hidden, that there were men who'd kill for what we owned. Guess he was right." Morrison's hand moved toward his gun, but Collins caught his wrist. "Boss," the deputy said quietly, "if that claim's real, I know what it means." Morrison snapped, but his voice had lost its confidence. He was trapped now, caught between his greed and the law he'd sworn to uphold. If he took these girls by force and their claims were legitimate, he'd hang for it. But I could see the wheels turning in his head, looking for another angle, another way to get what he wanted. Men like Morrison didn't give up easy when this much money was on the table. "Claims don't matter if there's nobody to work them," he said finally. "These girls are still minors. They'll need a guardian, someone to manage their affairs until they come of age." "They have a guardian," I said, the words surprising me as much as everyone else. Morrison laughed. "You? You're not even family." "Pa named him in the will," Emma said, her voice steady as granite. "Mr. Jacob Stone of Stone Ranch is to serve as guardian to his daughters in the event of his death, with full authority over their persons and property." She was lying. I could see it in the slight tremor at the corner of her mouth, the way her eyes didn't quite meet mine when she said it. But it was a good lie, the kind that could save lives if we all played it right. Morrison wasn't buying it. "Let me see that will again." But as he reached for the document, Sarah chose that moment to wake up with a violent coughing fit that sprayed blood across her blanket. She tried to sit up, failed, and collapsed back with a whimper that cut through me like a knife. "She needs a doctor," I said, kneeling beside her. "This conversation can wait." "Ain't no doctor coming out in this storm," Collins said, and for the first time, he sounded more concerned than threatening. "Roads are already impassable." Morrison was still studying the will by firelight, looking for flaws in Emma's story. But the document looked official enough, and the silver ore was real. He was smart enough to know that making a mistake here could cost him everything. "This isn't over," he said finally, folding the will and handing it back to Emma. "Guardian or not, I'll be watching. One slip, one sign these children aren't being properly cared for, and I'll be back." "Looking forward to it," I said. As the two lawmen made their way to the door, Morrison turned back one last time. "Funny thing about mining claims," he said. "A lot of accidents happen in mines. Cave-ins, gas explosions, claim jumpers. Would be a shame if something happened to those properties before these girls could benefit from them." The threat hung in the air like smoke as they disappeared into the blizzard, leaving me alone with 5 children and a whole new set of problems. Emma collapsed into a chair as soon as they were gone, the strength that had carried her through the confrontation finally abandoning her. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I had to lie about the guardian thing. The will doesn't say nothing about you. But the claims are real." She nodded. "Real as rain. Pa found them just before he died. But he made us promise to keep it secret. Said there were men who'd kill for silver, and he was right. Sarah coughed again, weaker this time, and I knew we were running out of time. Storm or no storm, doctor or no doctor, something had to be done. "Emma," I said, "can you ride?" "Yes, sir." "Good. Because come morning, you're going to take your sisters to my brother's place in Silver Creek. He's got a wife and kids, proper family. They'll take you in until we can figure out what to do about those claims." "What about you?" I looked at the broken door, thought about Morrison's threats and the men who'd be coming once the storm cleared. Thought about the choice I'd made tonight, the line I'd crossed, and the price that would have to be paid. "I'll be along directly," I said. "But first, I got some business to finish here." Outside, the wind was already dying down, and I could see stars beginning to show through the breaking clouds. The storm was ending, which meant our time was running out. But for the first time in 15 years, I wasn't running from a fight. I was running toward one. By dawn, the girls were safely on their way to Silver Creek. Little Sarah wrapped in furs and riding double with Emma, her fever finally broken. I watched them disappear over the ridge. 5 brave souls who taught a broken man how to stand up again. Morrison came back, just like he promised. Brought a dozen men with him, all hungry for silver and blood. But they found something they didn't expect. Federal marshals from Denver, drawn by a telegram I'd sent about territorial officials threatening children who owned legitimate mining claims. The Morrison home was shut down within a week. The sheriff himself got 20 years in territorial prison. And the Carson sisters became the richest family in 3 counties. Their claims yielding more silver than anyone had dreamed. I never did make it to Silver Creek. The marshals offered me a job. Said the territory needed men who'd stand up for what was right. Figured maybe it was time to stop hiding from the world and start living in it again. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I still hear Sarah's whisper, "Please don't let us die." But now, instead of haunting me, those words remind me that sometimes the best way to save yourself is to save someone else first.